Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Joining us now, a good Gregg to talk about I don't know, I guess we'll find out, Gregg. Gregg O'Keefe is senior writer for The Athletic, and we are going to talk about the U.S. men's national team's loss and exit in Copa America and Gregg Berhalter's future. Gregg, it has been a wild 24 hours for you all covering this tournament out in Kansas City. What was the mood last night after the game, and how surprised were you that U.S. Soccer went ahead and was like, yeah, we're going to look at stuff after what seemed to be so much rebuff that, like, Berhalter's our guy. And then we have this statement, and apparently they're going to take a look at things.
Yeah, I mean, look, the mood was pretty somber, as you would imagine, really. Spent time in the reasonably short press conference that Berhalter gave after the game, some one-word answers to some of my colleagues, and then in the mixed zone where we speak to the players down in the bottom there of the Arrowhead Stadium, and as you can imagine, nobody was singing and dancing. I think it's probably to be expected that a football federation of any sort says they're going to launch a review when there's such a disappointing performance at a major tournament, when they fall so short of their strategic aims. That seems to be the thing these days, and there's a review. Maybe some supporters thought that at some stage last night, given the drama of it all, there might actually be an announcement, regarding his Berhalter's future directly. I think that was always going to be unlikely. Whatever happens, whatever the next step is, Matt Crocker and his team will want to take some time, assess what's happened at the tournament, and we can discuss that, because it's not a clear picture of dismal failure, despite the results and the end product, i.e. out in the group stages. And I think they'll want to, speak to stakeholders and assess what the best thing is to do now. But yeah, you're right. It was, it was a night of drama even afterwards, and we'll have to see what happens now once this review is done.
For sure. So let's unpack this piece by piece, and there's a lot of pieces. But the results themselves, and we can go back even to, if you want to go all the way back to the World Cup, if you want to include the friendlies, including the one here against Colombia where they lost 5-1 just outside of Washington, D.C. at the Commander Stadium, the tie to Brazil, and then obviously the 3 games in this tournament. Like, is there consistency in the performance, and ultimately what is the problem in the performances that produces these results? Or is there not been consistency, and maybe that's part of the problem? Like, how do you actually diagnose where U.S. soccer is right now post Copa America?
Well, it's incredibly difficult to actually diagnose where it is, in the sort of, as we still sit in this mood of kind of failure, essentially, from the tournament. But you've hit on a key word there, I feel: inconsistency. And, having been watching the US men's national team in the build-up to this, and then during the tournament, across its 3 pit stops, and sadly there's not going to be any more for the US. Consistency has been an issue for key players and in key moments. And, we can break down the games, but it started well against Bolivia, as you would expect, a weaker opponent. We can probably say now, with splendid hindsight, America should have scored more goals. They should have taken more chances. And that goal differential maybe wouldn't have been the issue it was going to be last night had, results been different. And then sometimes things can just change on a split second, a rush of blood to the head, something it's very difficult to control. And for me, the key narrative, and that makes it difficult to assess things like the wider program and where they are, seem to revolve, certainly a lot of it anyway, on Timmy Weah's moment of absolute madness in Atlanta. That changes that game. That leaves the US, albeit people will say, look, they still should have won that game, but it gave them a significant mountain to climb in the context of that game against the Panama side that have gone on to qualify from the group stages, and certainly no mugs. So one thing I was speaking to the players about last night is, look, no one was making excuses, really. We'll talk about the officiating, but Josh Sargent said to me, look, it doesn't matter that, yeah, Timmy, there was things that really hurt us, but we still had the chance to make up for that. And they did. You know, they had the chance to beat Uruguay last night, to prove that they're an elite team. And some players were talking about wanting to win this tournament in Dallas in the build-up when we were speaking to them in the roundtable interviews. They were saying, look, we're here to win it. So if they were going to be good enough to do that, they needed to deliver last night and beat Uruguay, and they couldn't do it. And consistency in terms of creating chances, taking chances, the key failing, I feel, in this tournament just wasn't there.
Gregg O'Keefe, senior writer at The Athletic, is with us here on the Hoffman Show as we dissect U.S. soccer's exit from Copa America. And I think, Gregg, you are the perfect person to talk to about this next question, because your more specific job title is you cover a lot of these U.S. players in Europe. So you know this player pool extraordinarily well. And there's starting to be a lot of pushback on the notion that this is a golden generation. And certainly by resume, this is. These players are more accomplished playing at better clubs than any generation of American players before them, and whether that can, what the threshold is for a golden generation, whatever. I hope this player pool looks not as good as the one that we have 10 years from now, because the sport continues to grow and our talent continues to get better, and that'll be the next golden generation. Point is, this is a better player pool on paper than it seems like we've ever had in this country. Do you believe that to be the case, and thus it is fair for a lot of these, or more fair at least for a lot of these arrows to go at Berhalter and the staff for not getting more out of them? Or are these players not as good as perhaps they're being propped up to be based off of where they are, just because of where they play their club football?
It's a good question. Look, as a Brit, first of all, I'm going to hold my hands up and say the term golden generation sends a shiver down my spine. I don't need to remind you about how many England golden generations have flopped. And, we've had teams out there with Paul Scholes, Wayne Rooney, David Beckham, unbelievable, Ashley Cole, unbelievable players, and they fail to perform. Sometimes you can have the golden generation players, and if it's circumstances don't work, the wrong coach, it doesn't deliver. It's not always a gimme having these top players. It should help. And it's interesting that you say, compared to previous rosters, this, of course, is the best. And you rightly say, my role in the last 12 months, I've been following a lot of these players around Europe, and, they're performing solidly. But I think now you can look at it and say, there's some exciting young players, and then there's a clutch of players in the sort of golden years in their prime. But are any of them absolutely tearing it up at major European clubs? Well, I'll give you one, Christian Pulisic. That's no surprise to anybody. He's the best player. He's the most valuable player on this team. He's the captain. More often than not, he makes the difference. I was writing about Pulisic last night.
Yeah, that piece, by the way, fantastic. If people want to read more of just where Pulisic is relative to the rest of the pool and how that tends to play itself out in games.
Thank you. And yeah, but he can't do it on his own. And so my point speaks to, you look around the rest of the roster. The goalkeeper, Matt Turner, the first choice goalkeeper, couldn't get a game in the Premier League for Nottingham Forest, one of the relegation strugglers last season. A solid goalkeeper, I'm not digging him out, but that's the level. So golden generation because he's playing in the Premier League, but he didn't play. So Gino Dest, and this is unfortunate, this is where you need luck in big tournaments, an exceptional talent. Almost went unbeaten at PSV in Holland with injured, can't play any part. Joe Scali, who steps in, a good young player, has had a solid season at Mönchengladbach. Not a world beater, not yet. He's young, he's 21. The centre-backs, you've got Tim Ream, okay, plays a lot in the Premier League, but he's 36. Chris Richards, yeah, he's had a good season at Crystal Palace. He's actually looked really good, flipped between defence and midfield, but I don't think he did too much wrong in this tournament. There are a couple of shaky moments. And then you go through the team, and I guess it's in creativity and goal scoring where, as has been evident for the US, they've lacked that against Bolivia and then in moments again last night. And that's where I'm talking about Pulisic having to carry the can on his own. Gio Reyna, exceptional talent, but he just hasn't delivered that consistently yet. He didn't get the minutes at Dortmund. Again, Nottingham Forest took him on loan. He barely played. I actually really rate the guy. I think there's so much potential there, but potential hasn't been passed into actual consistent performance yet. They've got a robust central midfield. They've got Tyler Adams, who suffered injuries last season but looks the part at Bournemouth. Hopefully he kicks on this season. Weston, did did well at Juventus, another big club. But I don't think beyond Pulisic, you've got players really tearing it up at these big clubs and winning trophies. So you have to kind of factor that in when we talk about golden generations, I think. And then, sorry, I should mention Folarin Balogun, who a lot of potential, but again, drops just into that potential category. He's not in his golden years yet. And had a difficult first season at Monaco, who weren't challenging for honours. So maybe a little bit of realism is required and a bit of a reset into how we think about this golden generation.
Is part of that is Gregg O'Keefe is our guest from The Athletic here on the Hoffman Show today for Not My Beat. Is part of that the fact that we are artificially creating a timeline because of 2026, where if I hear you say that and I don't know that the World Cup is in 2026, I'm like, sick, we're going to be awesome in 4 years, right? Some of these guys that are 19, 20 years old are going to enter their prime. The problem is the U.S., along with Canada and Mexico, is hosting the World Cup in 2026, and we've put all this pressure on performing well in that tournament. Are we actually just ahead of schedule because of this? It's not artificial. The World Cup is a big deal, but because of this, for lack of a better word, artificially implemented deadline that we've put that doesn't prevent the U.S. from being great in 2028 and in some in between, whatever tournament, whether it's Copa America again, or if there's another tournament. And then ultimately the 2030 World Cup is perhaps actually their better shot based off of the player pool right now.
I mean, it's a really interesting point. It's an arbitrary deadline.
Yeah, that's the word I was trying to go.
Yeah, but it's true what you're saying, because that's been imposed. Look, it's not an imposition. It's the biggest opportunity, in my opinion, that soccer in the US has ever had to exponentially grow this sport and to try and get it to bridge that gap between, football, baseball, basketball, and so on. But it is arbitrary. So what, as you just said, programs don't develop necessarily like that. You've got to deal with the individuals on their journey that they're on now. So it might be that in 2030, this group of players with the supplementary talents that break through in that time, Cavan Sullivan, could go and be an absolute superstar in Europe. At Manchester
For those
City.
that don't know, 16-year-old just signed a contract that he can't even act on yet because he's not 18, but eventually will be at Manchester City, like you just said. So from the Philly area. So for those that don't know, there are more stars coming.
Yeah, and there should be. This is a huge nation. And look, we can talk about different things, pay to play, but they should be producing exceptional soccer players. But unfortunately, that's the pressure, and that's the situation. It is what they're dealing with. And that's the challenge for Matt Crocker, director of football, for the people around him going right up to the top. That's the challenge that they're working with. So they have to have a more competitive US men's national team in 2026, no doubt, or they will miss a great opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
So two more things for you, Gregg. One more for this U.S. side, and then we can get into the officiating discussion at least briefly for a moment. Crocker is not from U.S. soccer. He's from Europe, from Britain. I know Aguchi Onyewu was very high up. Aguch spent most of his career in Europe. Did not, obviously he was a legend of U.S. soccer, but professionally played in Europe. This is not the same people that have been running U.S. soccer for a long time, which is why I think it was so mystifying that they brought Berhalter back. And it's like, wait, you were brought in because you thought differently. And then the search committee, which, by the way, did include Berhalter's brother, lands on Gregg again. If they make a move here, which we don't know that they will, but if they make a move here, what do you think they need to be looking for in the next coach? And one thing I think about a lot, sorry for the long windup here on the question, is a guy like Berhalter comes from MLS, and the style that is played in MLS, now all of a sudden you have all these players playing in Europe. So I think over time, Crocker's talked about we need to develop an identity as a youth academies and national teams, et cetera, and you kind of carry that through, and that is a way that many footballing nations have built. So there's consistency, same system from youth levels to the top. That's going to take time. 2026, there is no time. You're looking at trying to find the best coach for the current player pool, most of which at least the starters are playing in Europe in a variety of different systems. Long wind-up lands on a very simple question. What should they be looking for, and who are the names that fit that mold?
Well, this is, I mean, and you've set it up very accurately there, because this is the challenge that faces everybody, is that they've got to balance these long-term goals, developing. I think of Spain. I think to an extent, without the end product of England, I think of successful German teams where every team in that international program plays a similar style of football. They're recognisable. It's coached right through the age ranks, and they have an identity. Now, I'm not sure I know what the US men's national team's soccer identity is yet. You can throw buzzwords around, but their style changes. But then you have to look at it and say, well, in fairness to Berhalter, the imperative for him was making this team in a reasonably short period of time competitive. If he stays in the job, his challenge, well, it should have been to get beyond the group stages of the Copa America, right, and then beyond that, the World Cup. But it's interesting that they brought in all these new faces, all these people with big reputations, and I know from interactions with US soccer fans that there was frustration that maybe I don't think it's personal against Berhalter, and I don't think anyone's saying that he doesn't have his qualities as a coach, but there's an allure to the new in sports, isn't there? And I think people were expecting, after all that, the exhaustive search, a new face. And look, this morning you can already hear the talk, Jurgen Klopp, so on and so forth, Ralph Rangnick. Who should it be that comes in and if they do decide to move on? But whoever it is going to face a similar challenge, and all the coach should be focused on is making sure this team learns from this and is in a far better position. Players are developed, coached to the extent that they do not stutter again in the group stage in the World Cup. I mean, and let's not forget, Berhalter had a reasonable performance in Qatar in 2022. They got out of the group stage. They didn't manage that this time. They came up against Holland in the knockouts, and it was a tough draw. But if you're going to talk about US wanting to be one of the teams, the world's elite teams, at some stage you're going to have to go beyond that, and expectations are high. Been a lot of money spent on this program, and results matter.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think the part of the frustration, I will speak for myself, although it echoes a lot of probably what you hear with US fans, is like, it wasn't like he was the best coach in MLS 100% and has this unbelievable resume at Columbus Crew. Like, he won some trophies and was all right. But I think when you look at the best coaches, he came out of I don't want to say nowhere, but certainly was not like, oh, he's the must-have, and then you hire him again mid-scandal, everything that's happening after a reasonable result. It just seems like the obvious exit ramp that they didn't take. All right, last thing, Gregg, for you. All jokes aside, the Ted Lasso line about offsides actually is brilliant. You know it when you see it. And I have a kind of I know the technology, like we could spend another 20 minutes talking about the call last night, the goal, and some of the very specifics. But in watching the game around the world in different leagues, from the NWSL, which is a league I spend a lot of time on here on the women's side, to watching Premier League on NBC and international competitions, it seems like the technology has ruined the spirit of the rule. The rule was put in for a specific reason to prevent certain advantages from happening. And now we are drawing these very silly lines on television and being like, oh, that guy's offside because his toenail was beyond this or that. Do we just need to relook at this as a whole across soccer, and I guess that would start with FIFA, to help redefine this very critical part of the game? Because ultimately, if you want to grow the game, you need goals, and a lot of goals are being called off, or last night it was just confusing. Like the scoring part of the game is so impacted by this thing that has become even more nebulous than it already was.
Yeah, 100% yes. There needs to be a complete rethink of that, of the implementation through VAR of offsides. I mean, look, in the context of the US, you're trying to win hearts and minds. You're trying to bring in kids, adults who may not watch soccer regularly. You're trying to convince them through things like the Copa America, big stadiums, and playing in football stadiums against teams like Uruguay, that this is a sport worth their time, and to devote some of their sort of bandwidth beyond the big sports here. And how is that possible when games are being stopped, started all the time? Decisions are nebulous, like you say. They're impossible to understand. or they're so agonizing that there's this continuing, like people stop in 5 minutes, they're scrutinizing a line and a toenail. For me, it's killing the enjoyment of the sport. VAR is a whole other discussion. I think VAR is worth persisting with, but the way it's implemented with offside completely needs to change. And let's hope it's very different in 2 years' time when World Cup football comes to North America. And, let's hope some of the refs that we see in a Copa America don't make the cut in 2 years' time. There's been some strange calls.
Yeah, and also player safety becomes an issue with how poorly the games have been administrated. There's just, again, we could spend another 20 minutes even on just the guy from last night. Just brutal. But if you want more, you can just go to The Athletic and read Gregg's work. Gregg O'Keefe writing in The Athletic. They've got a bunch of great coverage up. It's not exactly the most joyful, but I guess it does help you be informed, which is better than just being angry. So Gregg, appreciate your time here on the show, and sure we'll be catching up down the line as more things develop and Berhalter stays or goes.
It's a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.